If you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the business of lifelong learning, you're in the right place. I'm Celisa Steele.
And I'm Jeff Cobb, and this is the Leading Learning Podcast.
Hello, and it is great to be back. We missed a couple of weeks because we have been very busy with an event, Learning Technology Design. We just completed that. It happened May 18th and 19th in Arlington, Virginia. And what we want to devote today's episode to is an after-action review. But before we jump in, we want to make a few thank yous, especially to YM Learning, who sponsored the Learning Technology Design event.
Yes, without YM, this really wouldn't have been possible, and there are also a lot of other people without whom this would not have been possible. So our advisors, our speaker facilitators, our exhibitors, we're going to make sure that for all of those people, we link to them in the show notes. We had so many people involved that we don't want to name them all here, but my gosh, I'm sure, we have so many listeners who are in a position similar to ours where they go out and hold events and they know what it feels like afterwards to, that big boy, glad to have that done. Glad we did it. But as you said, we're going to step back, do what we did with the Leading Learning Symposium back in the fall. In fact, we'll link back to that. We did an after action review on that as well. And, while it's still fresh in our minds, we just want to take a little bit of time and look at learning technology design and reflect on it a little bit.
So just as a refresher, the after action review asks 4 questions. So the first one is, what did we set out to do? The second one is, what actually happened? The third is, why is there a difference between the first two? And then the fourth, what should we continue and what should we change? So that's sort of the framework that we kind of want to have in mind as we're discussing LTD and how it went.
And as with our symposium after action review, we're not going to be terribly buttoned up and academic about that, but that's just it's a nice framework for doing some meaningful reflection. And so let's start off with kind of this overarching theme of learning technology design, and why we tackled that in the first place. So what did we set out to do with that? Why do we even think we needed an event about that in the first place?
So in terms of the why event, I think we both saw a gap and a potential opportunity in terms of really serving the folks who are involved in the learning aspect of their business. A lot of folks working with trade and professional associations who have that continuing education, that professional development, that learning aspect of their business. And while there are different events out there that talk about technology or talk about learning, there didn't seem to really be one that kind of put it together from that business standpoint for people who are really serving that kind of market-facing need of adult learners.
Yeah, we just saw a gap, like you said. I mean, there are good conferences out there on training and development, definitely ones that focus on technology. There are good association events out there, but ones that really focus in on the business of education, being in the business of education, and one that's market-facing towards adult learners. That just was not out there, and of course, that was the same sentiment that drove us towards doing the symposium in the fall. But the symposium was really, aimed at leadership level folks. I mean, people who have the vision and strategy, wrestling with the big changes that are happening out there, and what to do with that with respect to their organization. We also wanted something that was more about kind of the front lines, the hands-on, rubber meets the road type stuff. So this was, I'd say, our more tactical sort of event for professionals.
Absolutely. And then in terms of the name, the Learning Technology Design, we went with that just because we feel like those 3 things together are extremely important. If you have one or two, but not the other or others, then it just isn't as you're not doing as effective a job as you can be doing. And one thing we talked about and used, I guess, at the closing session on day 2 is we talked about sort of a kind of a Venn diagram of learning and technology and design. And if you have just learning and design, but without technology, then you might have a really, well-kept secret, because if you're not leveraging that technology to kind of be able to get the word out to more people about what you have, or even to meet the needs of more people with technology, then, you might have a great thing, but you're probably not serving as many people as you can.
Yeah, and if you've got technology and design together, but no real learning going on, you've got that great, shiny object syndrome that so many organizations fall prey to. And then, I mean, finally, if you've just got technology and learning together with no design whatsoever, then you're going to get the overload that we all feel, the fire hose effect, as we put it in the conference. So, you really do have to have all three working well together in concert. And, and so we recognize that. We also, to tell the truth, took a little page from technology entertainment design. Everybody knows TED. Now you've got LTD.
So one of the things we talked about at the opening session on day one was, we looked at just the fact that there seems to be such huge opportunity, right? When you think about learning learning and technology in particular these days. And Jeff, I know you talked about a few examples, things like...
Yeah, I mean, and I didn't really even name them so much, but we had up on the screen, Coursera, Udemy, Khan Academy. We all know these just big, huge, technology and learning plays that are happening out there right now. Lynda.com. And you would think, with what technology has made possible that, access is just blown open worldwide for learners, for professionals, who want to develop learning, and it has. I mean, obviously, there's a lot going on, millions of people participating in these types of activities, but
there's still a big gap, and we drew on some of the research out of the Pew Research Center, that nonpartisan fact tank, and actually I interviewed John Hargan here for the Leading Learning podcast a few episodes ago, but we drew on their recent report around lifelong learning and technology, and you look at that, and the vast majority of Americans are not at all familiar or not very familiar with things like Khan Academy, massive open online courses, digital badges, and even just distance learning.
Yeah, and it's amazing because that Pew study came in, we became aware of it just a month or two before this event. It only came out in February.
It was in
March, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice thing about having a small, agile event is we were able to factor that into how we looked at things and talked about the state of learning and technology and design right now. So brought that to bear. But then we also brought some of our own research to bear on this.
That's right, because, if you think about why is it that so many Americans or adults living in America, that's who Pew focused on in their research, why so many of them aren't familiar with these technologies that are really enhancing and changing the way that we're learning. You have to ask yourself, why is there this gap? And I will just add that it's interesting that not only do the vast majority of adults living in America aren't familiar with those terms, but at the same time, they identify as lifelong learners. So they say, yes, that phrase, lifelong learner, applies to me very well, and yet they have no idea about these technology advancements that are happening and really impacting learning. But so you have to ask yourself why. If you have these people who identify as lifelong learners, but they aren't aware of this, and so one of the reasons might be the fact that there aren't very many associations engaging and offering some of these cutting edge technologies, things like digital badges and MOOCs. And that's where we did present some of our data from the Association Learning Plus Technology report, where you see that very few associations, I think just a little over 6% of associations said that they are doing something around MOOCs. And even micro-credentialing actually was the highest of kind of those different emerging types of learning. And those were even that was under a fifth of respondents. So, there's clearly room for growth. And then you think about if associations are going to be the way that a lot of working adults get exposure to and find out about these advancements, then it seems like, we need associations to sort of step in if we're going to have the lifelong learners more generally aware.
Yeah, absolutely. But then, at the same time, we pointed out that, data from something like the Pew report really is focused much more at kind of structured, formal type education. And a lot of the questions that were aimed at the people who were participating in that survey also more towards kind of structured, formal type education. And as we pointed out, and I think we all know this, at one level or another, that's not the way most of us are doing a lot of our learning these days. And I threw up a slide. Maybe we can actually manage to get that into the show notes too. Kind of taking a quick pass at my own personal learning inventory, the types of things that I do learning on a day-to-day basis. And I participate in communities. I listen to podcasts. I look at videos. I use Wikipedia. I use my Evernote for note taking and reviewing things. I mean, any number of things. I mean, this podcast, is one of my main learning mechanisms, and that's in no way represented in something like the Pew data. So we're just learning differently. And, in that opening session and really throughout, we're trying to say, okay, what does that mean for learners these days and how we approach learning? What does it mean for organizations? How do we need to be thinking differently about the role that we play for learners?
And just given that list that you just enumerated there, I mean, those were questions, and that was a theme that we brought to LTD. We kind of had a questioning framework, and we asked in that opening session some of the questions like you just asked, Jeff, but we also asked people to be very thoughtful about why they were there. And so we asked them to first think about, why they're there, what's one thing that they really want to achieve by the time they finish that event. And I think that's a fairly typical question. I think that, gets asked often at events. But we added a second question as well.
Yeah, we asked people to focus on to say what if their focus was really on helping others here? What would that look like? What would they do? What could they offer out of their knowledge and experience? And just to raise these up, like you said, I mean often the why am I here? What I want out of this kind of question is raised, but I don't think it's actually raised and focused on at a conscious level and then carried throughout the event in a way that you keep returning to it and have to keep, asking yourself, what am I getting out of this? And then what am I sharing out of this? And what am I bringing to it? And we try to make all of that, very conscious throughout the event.
And so we did return to those questions. We returned at the closing session of day one and said, okay, we asked you this morning to reflect on and to do some sharing around, why you're here and what you can give while you're here. So what can you get and what can you give? And then we asked people to actually think back on the day and share with others something that they got, something that they learned, or something that they gave. And we gave them, a framework for doing that. We went really old school and then went
old school.
That's right, all the way back to Socrates, and we looked at some of the ways that he would use questioning to really help his students to really question, dig deeper, to better understand, their knowledge or their ideas. And so we talked about 4 different types of questioning. He had sort of a gadfly and the stingray and the midwife and the ignoramus. And so we gave examples of those. And then as people shared something that they gave or got during the day, then someone responded to them with a question to dig a little deeper or to probe a bit.
Yeah, and as part of that, we did some modeling too. I mean, we didn't just throw that up there and say, "Hey, try this out." We went out and got somebody to volunteer, did a little Socratic questioning with them, got them to turn around and do some Socratic questioning, with somebody else, and this starts to highlight this. This was not the kind of event to come to and expect to sit in a corner and not be involved and not participate. I think anybody who's familiar with our events at this point knows that we may not get it perfect, but we're definitely going to expect people to roll up their sleeves and get involved with it and be active learners. And these were very much active learning type sessions that we were holding.
And then to start day 2, we continued that theme of, you need to be active, you need to be doing things while you're there. And we kind of turned to the third element. We sort of had focused more day 1 in the morning on learning and technology. So at the beginning of day 2, we really wanted to think about that third element about design. And so we drew on design thinking.
Yeah. And, so I think design thinking is been a bit of a buzz term, for a while now. Some people tuned into it more than others, and it's one of those things that takes a pretty simple idea, which is that you really need to empathize with and understand your users, in our case, your learner, as deeply as possible, really get at their motivations and start building, from there to, creating potential designs or really even, creating potential statements about the user's need, and then from there moving into how you might address that need. But all of that, very, very question driven. We looked to the Stanford School of Design, which is very famous for this, and just used what they call a point of view Mad Lib as sort of an exercise there to have folks really try to dig into creating or thinking of a specific type of adult learner, trying to identify what that person really needs, trying to come up with some surprising insights around that, from which they then might move into, okay, what do we do about that? And so that was also very active, having people really dig in on doing that. And I have to say, we asked, afterwards, did people find that difficult to do or not? And most people say they didn't. But I'll mark, and in a moment here, I think we need to come back and talk about how are we doing on all of this? Did it achieve what we wanted to? And those types of questions around an after action review. I'm not convinced it was as easy as they thought it was, because as I listened to the responses coming from the tables, I don't think people were digging deep enough, not nearly deep enough, and I think that's a fundamental problem. And it kept coming up throughout the discussions. It's really kind of that lingering, we built it, but they didn't come sort of thing that's going on. And people are thinking about that from a learning perspective. They're thinking about it from a marketing perspective. And it was emphasized again and again. If you don't dig deep initially, really get down into that user need at a motivational level, at an emotional level, really, and build the product from there, and then build the marketing out from there, you're going to be stuck with that. If we built it and they don't come sort of scenario.
I think that good design is deceptively simple.
Oh, always, yes.
And so, I think that it's not hard to complete the activity because, it's that Mad Lib, right? All you got to do is fill in the blanks.
Right.
But it's tricky to really get to that surprising insight and actually have it be a surprising insight that then leads you off on this path to discovery of what can you do with that insight.
I mean, it takes discipline, and you have to keep probing. You have to keep asking why. We didn't bring this up as a specific framework, but the whole idea of the 5 whys, to dig deeper and deeper into something, and you have to press yourself to do that. So I think with that particular activity, it went well, and I think people were participating in it and getting something out of it. But it's the type of thing that, thinking back on, I would love to be able to spend a half a day or a full day really digging into design approaches, and I think you have to, in order to kind of keep pushing yourself to really get to where that can take you.
And so the last full group kind of general session was at the close of day one, close of day 2. Mm. And for that, we brought together what we called kind of a dynamic rotating panel. And so the idea here was that for panels, you often have your kind of pre-selected panelists, and then they're up there and people subject them to questions and you hear from them. And we wanted to borrow on that model, but we wanted it to be more dynamic in the sense of, okay, what if anybody could be on that panel? And what if people could hop up and be on the panel based on, I actually have some experience or expertise that matches up with that question, so let me get up there and share that.
Yeah, and this was one of those areas, and we said this at the event, we like to work without a net to a certain extent. We consider these events, obviously we're very attuned to making sure we deliver a very high value experience, and we're not going to do anything that, is ultimately going to endanger that. But at the same time, we want to take a few risks and try out some things that hopefully then, if they work and work well, our attendees are going to be able to take them and try them out as well, because they're all running events, most of them. So this was one where, we came up with this dynamic panel concept. We did our best to kind of hedge our bets and make sure that it was going to work, that we were going to have some people who were going to be willing to participate and ask questions and things like that. But in the end, it was good we did that, and I would recommend, everybody hedge their bets when they try something like this. But people came up. That panel rotated through several times, and with people that we had no idea if they were going to be the people coming up there and being on the panel. And and it got a little bit chaotic at times. It maybe wasn't sometimes as succinct and as rapid fire as we might have liked, but that's what we would have liked. That's the sort of controlling mentality, and we just sort of had to let it go and let it become what it did. And I think what it became was great. We had really great discussion going on for close to 45 minutes there, and before we stopped it because we were running out of time. I think we could have kept going for quite a while.
Yeah, I think people were engaged. I think that for me, this would be an interesting concept to revisit and see if we can get a little tighter around it, because I think there was also a tendency in the room to kind of move into commenting and kind of keep going deeper on, not even deeper, but keep going longer on one question. And, I think that's, we tend to, someone says something and then someone responds and then you kind of piggyback on that and it keeps going and building. But I think it would have been, or could have been nicer to see, like, what if after you get kind of one substantive response, you move on to the next question. But it's funny, I felt like the room was fuller of comments than questions.
Yeah, that's probably a fair statement. And, I think it's probably the type of format, too, that people probably have to experience a little bit and get their heads around a little bit. And I imagine it's the type of thing that if you've got a room full of at least some people who are kind of seasoned dynamic panelists, it's going to change the dynamic.
I agree with that. I think that's true. So I think it would be fun to play with again, get a little tighter on our kind of guidelines that we're giving people. And then, I think the familiarity that folks bring to it would help it to flow a little bit better and be that much more of a good experience and a valuable experience.
So maybe we need to talk about, the sort of specific content that was provided outside of this kind of framework that we're talking about. Everything we've been talking about so far has been kind of our general sessions. Everybody's in the same room together. I mean, everybody at the event, including the exhibitors, all in, one main hall at the NRECA Conference Center in Arlington in this case. And so we've had, this opening, we've had a closing event of day one, we've had an opening of day two, closing of day two that's kind of framed everything. And like we said, it was this questioning framework. And, I guess before we move on to talking about what was then going on in kind of the content segments of the, that seems like such an artificial distinction. I mean, all of this is content, all of this is experience, but I guess sort of our framing efforts before we get to the other stuff that we were doing. And, from an after-action review perspective, how well did that go? Did the questioning sort of approach work? And we should probably say up front, the kind of, what did we set out to do? I mean, we weren't 100% sure going into the event that the questioning framework, we didn't have it nailed down exactly. I mean, we were able to kind of organically develop a little bit really, right as we were going into the event, because we'd gotten so much input ahead of time. And I think because it was a small event and, we're very kind of entrepreneurial in how we approach events, we were able, this whole questioning sort of framework really emerged pretty close to the actual event taking off.
Well, we had the concept of questioning for a number of weeks, but, in terms of exactly how we carried it out and exactly, because questioning obviously is a huge subject, and there are any number of people, from Socrates on up to, Warren Berger has a recent book on questioning. I just think that, so we weren't sure exactly where we were going to land in terms of exactly who we wanted to use, or you even mentioned the 5 whys, all these things we had sort of floating around as potential ways to talk about questioning, but exactly how we landed happened pretty close to the event itself.
But all in all, I mean, I think that worked out as a good framework. We're probably not going to repeat the framework from event to event, but I think the idea of having a framework overall, and I think we probably had more of one coming into this event than even going into the symposium. In some ways, I mean, the symposium had themes and threads running through it. I guess that was kind of our framework. But I think one of our comments after that was we didn't maybe manage to sort of really connect that into as tight a framework as I think we pretty much did here. I feel like we set out to frame everything well and to kind of put that context around it. And I think for the most part, we're able to pull that off in this first event.
Yeah, I agree. So why don't we break here, and we'll pick up in the next episode and talk about the rest of the what we did at LTD. But in the meantime, I will mention that the site for LTD is still up and available and gives you information about what we did this year. That's ltd.leadinglearning.com. We'll be putting up a sign-up sheet if you're interested in joining us for LTD 2017.
And also, to get the show notes for everything that we have talked about so far, you can just go to leadinglearning.com /episode 35. So again, we have a lot more to talk about here, a lot more to cover, but we don't want to make one episode too long. So we will see you next time on the Leading Learning Podcast.